I last ended on discussing Vietnam and China, and really, again, apologizing for my not being able to integrate as much as I'd like a more lengthy discussion of Vietnam or Cambodia. So many other countries that are in this part of the world that have their own rich culture, and I'm just limited on time. And to be honest, my own knowledge on things start getting a little bit weaker in certain areas, and it's better to not talk too much about things that doesn't have the best handle on as well. But in any case, um, talking about ancient China, um, China is focused on mainly in Far East Asia. I think it's fair to say, at the expense of even Japan, and Japan gets next on the list of because of the role that they play in world politics. In other words, especially China becomes a middle kingdom, the main epicenter of dominance in the area, and many of the other nations are going to be paying tribute to them. And so, I kind of just want to make this clear that when we discuss in history importance doesn't mean. I mean, importance is a relative word, but when we're talking about global world politics, economic military powers that dominate, get most of the time for discussion and most of the research. Historians are trying to balance this out more, and there's been larger attempts at integrating nations that maybe have less of a significance on the international political jousting that's going on, being integrated, because it doesn't mean that there's not something significant going on. I mean, if we look, and I'm jumping far ahead here, in Tunisia, just a few years ago, this whole entire Middle East Arab Spring, which we'll talk about later, was set off by a country that in the Arab speaking world in North Africa, Tunisia doesn't get much press, but it starts things off. So again, we always got to draw things out like that. All right, I will just move on now. Okay. So then I'm also going to be talking just very little bit about Korea, but Korea is something is a place that Americans know very little about. We think very little about, but Koreans think about us every day because we have troops there. We've had bases since the 50s. Our tanks, our military, our flags are there. Some say to protect them from the north. The uh, the conflict between the north and the south is a post World War II event that doesn't really have any precedence in Korean history. Korea is supposed to be one. Unless we go back to these days of these broken up kingdoms, essentially it's not a natural break to have a north and a south, and many Koreans feel that way. I think one of the reasons recently you saw a U.S. ambassador was slashed in the face with a knife in South Korea. Many Koreans resent their country being split. Some blame us for perpetuating it, not all. And I have friends that have been there. Probably some of you have family that's been in the military there. It's a very complex thing, but I think that Americans would do best to learn more about Korea. And I do have more knowledge of Korea um, than, let's say, Vietnam. But again, we're limited on time. I just want to point out some things. First of all, the Yalu River is right here. This is the Manchurian Plain. This is China. So Korea is connected to China, and henceforth, Korea has had a long, intimate relationship with China, sometimes not in the best terms. Ultimately, currently, in current politics, China is really the only reluctant ally of North Korea. Um, but there, nonetheless, you had these important kingdoms that every Korean knows and almost no Westerner knows is the Goguryeo, the Silla, and the Pakche. Okay, and the Goguryeo covers the north part plus what is much of what would be considered in the south now in current times. And then you notice that Japan's right here. Japan and Korea are going to have their own complicated set of histories together, but it won't really be as bad. I can't think of any time in history that it was going to be as bad as it was in World War II, and it becomes really bad. And there is much resentment by Koreans with Japan because Japan occupied Korea for some time until World War II. Okay, and so it's good to just at least, at the very least, as you're looking at these nations and you see their history, when you hear the discussion and the complications between Japanese and Chinese and Korean peoples in the modern political sense, we can at least see why they're even having a relationship at all, how closely they are put together here. So I'm just going to talk about a few of the kingdoms here, just to mention. Koguryo conquered Silla and Pakche, and then shortened his kingdom's name to Koryo. Hence came the name still used, Korea. Okay, so I'm just kind of pointing out that the very term Korea has a context, kind of late, right? 10th century, of a unified nation. And so in that sense, we could say that from the 10th century up until the end of World War II, when the US invited the then ally Russia to take the North while we took the South, and then the Russians just stayed and we stayed and helped foster a civil war along with China, and that when the superpowers got involved, only then have they been split again. So that's something I just want to kind of point out. And that's if you just get that idea, that from the 10th century, the idea of this, that's important. Later, I think we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about Korea and some of the developments there, but we're going to have to move on, and I'm just going to end soon with Japan as well, also deserving much, much more time. Basically, rice farming began in the 3rd century BCE, and by 300, yes, I'm going from there to there, the land was dominated by native war clans. And in the mid-6th century, Prince Shotoku initiated Chinese ways in Buddhism. So that's also something I wanted to point out, is that we learned that Buddhism comes in from India to China, then from China to Japan, and that many Chinese ways did influence, and just the same with Korea, might I add, in terms of Confucianism and Buddhism. I forgot to mention that even with Korea, Koreans have a strong Confucian tradition, strong Buddhist tradition. These come through China. Now, Shinto religion, which is a little more complicated. So, to back up, as we saw in China, they had syncretic practices where you're going to see Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, and then other religious beliefs kind of mixed together sometimes. And Korea, you're going to have shamanism, you're going to have Buddhism, and you're going to have Confucianism as well, and some other forms being brought in. And in Japan, the same. Now, with Shinto, this is still remains Japan's major religion alongside Buddhism. It does not have a founder nor sacred scriptures. Shinto gods are called kami. They are sacred spirits which take the form of things and concepts important to life: wind, rain, mountains, trees, rivers, and fertility. Humans can become kami after they die and are revered by their families as ancestral kami. And so it wouldn't be hard to see how some of that could be integrated into Confucian concepts, right? And essentially, the term kamikaze, if you heard that, in World War II, this kind of comes transformed Shinto into a kind of nationalist religion. Um, I think it's fair to say, someone could take issue with this, that like the old pre-Christian Germanic religion become integrated into kind of Nazism, and the way that the Roman legacy gets integrated into Mussolini's fascism, that this old time religion, so to speak, of Japan gets integrated into an ultra nationalist kind of fascist Japanese religion in World War II. Um, but that's not to just accuse that religion of that, just pointing that out, that these things did happen. Um, this was a rough lecture, and then I'm jumping around so much. I would have liked this to have been more clear, coherent, with better transitions, but I'm hoping that I just mentioned some things, drop some things your way that might pique your interest, and that if you want on your own, you're going to do more research or even ask me questions. All right, that'll end for this section.